My husband, Julian, was a man who never failed. Our life was supposed to be a modern-day fairy tale, perfect in every way. Then, 6 months ago, everything fell apart. The change in Julian was shocking, like a sudden landslide. The warmth that always lived in his eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, aggressive glare that I didn't recognize. The man who used to leave sweet, handwritten notes for me on the bathroom mirror now barely spoke my name. All his affection just dried up. In its place, he launched a brutal, public campaign to destroy me emotionally. He started dating Serena. And Serena was everything I wasn't: loud, aggressively sensual, and notoriously reckless. Julian paraded her around at every major charity gala, his hand resting possessively on her waist while he acted as if I didn't even exist. He would openly mock my taste in fashion, my clothes, even my friends, all while Serena stood by, a smug little smile playing on her lips. I was suddenly just a roommate he tolerated, a burden he couldn't wait to get rid of. The humiliation was a constant, slow drip poison. I had to watch as the society pages cruelly labeled me the discarded relic and Serena the new trophy. I was drowning, completely lost in a sea of confusion and pain. My only sanctuary was my friend Mark, a kind colleague from my design firm. Mark listened without judgment. He let me cry over lukewarm coffee for hours, offering the gentle, consistent support that Julian had so violently ripped away from me. I made a plan. It was simple: endure the final 2 months until our yearly divorce clause kicked in, take the settlement I was entitled to, and leave Julian and his cruel, brazen affair behind forever. I knew I deserved better. But one night, something happened that cracked the perfect facade of his betrayal. Julian, Serena, and I were leaving a major art auction. As we walked, Julian was giving me this chillingly detailed explanation of why my presence was an embarrassment to his brand. Then he slipped on the wet pavement. It was just a small, clumsy stumble, but in that split second, as Julian caught his balance, I saw Serena's face. It wasn't the look of a smug lover, it was pure, unadulterated terror. Her eyes darted around frantically, scanning the street. She didn't rush to comfort Julian. She rushed to check our surroundings. Then Julian caught her eye, and the look passed between them, a flash of communication, sharp and urgent, that had nothing to do with romance. It was the look of 2 soldiers on a battlefield. The moment was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by Serena's practiced, dismissive laugh. But the image of her fear stuck with me. I started thinking. The chaos of the last 6 months, the public fights, the humiliating outings, the relentless cruelty, it all felt too orchestrated, too perfectly designed to hurt me. It didn't feel like a man falling out of love. It felt like a man building a wall. Then I remembered the one thing Julian still guarded with his life, his antique telescope. He always said it was an irreplaceable family heirloom. It was kept locked in a custom-built, climate-controlled observatory on our roof, a place he hadn't let me enter in 3 years. But I knew the code to the door. It was the date of our first kiss, a detail I thought he had long forgotten. That night, while Julian was supposedly working late, a new excuse that I assumed meant he was with Serena, I went to the roof. The observatory was eerily silent. I punched in the code and the door clicked open. I slipped inside. The room was not an observatory. The telescope was mounted on a track, but its barrel wasn't pointed at the stars. It was aimed directly at a complex control panel hidden beneath a velvet drape. The room was a dedicated surveillance hub. On the main screen was a detailed, multi-layered digital map of our entire city. Several sections were highlighted in red, including the specific cafe where Mark and I always met and the park near my design firm. Then I saw the open files. There were reports detailing a covert organization known as the Harvesters. They weren't criminals or terrorists in the usual sense. They were the shattered remains of a powerful cult my own father, as company had exposed and financially destroyed 20 years ago. The files explained their twisted method of vengeance. They targeted the loved ones, the emotional anchors of their enemies. The latest report was devastating. The Harvesters had identified Julian's primary vulnerability as his wife, Claramy, whom they believed he deeply cherished. My heart hammered against my ribs, and then I saw it. A file titled Operation Irrelevant Asset. Julian's own handwritten plan laid out the last 6 months in agonizing detail. He had learned the Harvesters were closing in. He knew he couldn't trust security alone. He had to convince the world, and more importantly, the Harvesters' surveillance network, that I was no longer his anchor. His distance, the public humiliation, the constant mocking, it was all a deliberate performance. A show designed to make me appear emotionally irrelevant, a discarded woman, completely worthless as a target. And Serena, she wasn't his lover. She was a highly trained operative, a mole working within the organization's periphery who had partnered with Julian. Her purpose was to be the highly visible, flamboyant distraction, drawing all the enemy's attention onto her and Julian's new relationship, leaving me entirely outside the blast radius. Those bandages I had seen on Julian's arm last week, they were documented as minor injuries sustained during a covert ambush that he had intentionally diverted to an abandoned property. He had been quietly fighting for my life while I believed he was simply destroying our marriage. My anger dissolved, replaced by a sudden, immense sorrow. I had mistaken his sacrifice for betrayal. The man who had always been obsessed with security was simply making sure I was the most secure asset of all, the one who looked like she didn't matter. There was a final sealed document on the desk. It was a transfer of deed for a small, beautiful apartment overlooking the park where Mark and I met. It was signed over completely to me, effective immediately. And on the bottom corner in Julian's rush script was a note: if she leaves, she deserves the life I couldn't give her. Ensure the rent is paid indefinitely. He had secured my physical safety, endured the pain of watching me fall apart, and then he had built a beautiful, safe new world for me to escape into with the man I thought I loved. He had sacrificed his reputation, his heart, and our marriage to save my life. I gently put the documents back. The pity and the overwhelming realization of his silent devotion made me feel physically ill. I wasn't leaving him? How could I? I couldn't leave the man who had suffered so profoundly, so privately, just to ensure my survival. I found a spare marker, and on the surveillance screen showing the map of my old routines, I drew a bright, unmistakable line from our house, leading directly to this command center. When Julian found me an hour later, waiting for him in the kitchen, his face was pale with exhaustion. He looked at me, ready for the tearful accusation I'm sure he expected. Instead, I walked right up to him, took his bandaged hand, and brought it to my cheek. "I'm staying," I whispered. And I know everything. He didn't need to ask how. He just closed his eyes, his perfect cold facade finally crumbling. A single ragged breath escaped him, and it sounded like 4 years of hidden pain finally being released. I held him then, no longer the perfect quiet wife, but the woman who understood the language of his fierce, protective love, a love that had literally turned betrayal into the ultimate self-sacrifice. He wasn't a ghost from my past. He was a martyr, and I would fight by his side until the very end. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like and subscribe for more.